Greetings, I am Tentus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It's once again Magic Monday, so we're going to talk about History of Magic again. We're going to bring up the second expansion of the Magic the Gathering series, Antiquities. So Antiquities was released on March 4th of 1994. It was an 85-card set, and it was based around artifacts and artifact-type effects. So the entire set, artifacts, artifacts, artifacts. Now, only 35 of the cards were actually colored. The rest were just artifacts and lands. Now, one of the things introduced here is that 5 of these lands actually had 4 different variations of pictures of them. And even amongst these 4 variations, some were common, some were uncommon. So it was very interesting and very unique that there was this split of not only having 4 variations of the same card at one time, 4 different pictures, but there was also differences in some being common and some being uncommon. So this was the first set to actually introduce a story. The story talks about the Brothers' War. It's a war between Urza and Mishra. These 2 brothers, in their youth, kind of discovered this power stone and split in 2, and the 2 of them sort of got into fights. They broke apart, they lost their relationship, they became enemies, they went to different nations. They researched these old artifacts from the Dracovin Empire, which was even older than their time period, this ancient empire that existed there. And so they began working on these armies and war machines and started beginning to fight each other. Eventually, Urza learned of sort of the treachery of Mishra, that he was being corrupted by this force called Phyrexia, that the very stone they originally had messed with kept in check, kept from invading Dominia, their home plane. And so he had to end this war with this grand weapon, and it did the Inslex burst. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. But this entire explosion basically destroyed an entire island, devastated the island, devastated everything on the continent, crushed everything, and ushered in the Ice Age. And actually the storyline right here continues farther down the line in the Ice Age series. Now, of course, the other series sort of take place in between there, and the storylines sort of continue. But there is this direct correlation between Antiquities and a later series I'll talk about called Ice Age. Now, there was a novel that came out this time that did give the full story, and it's described that this was the Brothers' War, and the character of Urza actually becomes a planeswalker at this point in time, and there's a later set which goes in his story as a planeswalker right after here, but he becomes a major character for a large portion of the sets and the storyline that goes between the sets. So with the printing of this set, Magic's creature types was raised to 100. Of course, many of these creature types have changed since then, but at this point in time, with this set release, there was exactly 100 types of creatures out there. Every card in the set that's not a land is an artifact in type or has the word artifact in its description of what it does. So that means every card, not a land, has something to do with artifacts. Everyone does. Of course, there were some errors in this set. There was a couple of cards where names of artists were misspelled. Reconstruction doesn't have the Antiquities symbol on it, which is an anvil. And of course, Thanos weaponry actually has 2 versions of it. That one has something wrong with the circle around the number that's slightly different. So there's 2 versions of that card. So the set actually only had commons and uncommons. Packs were actually released 8 to a pack with 6 commons and 2 uncommons, and 60 packs to a box. The fact is, the cards actually even weren't completely randomized, that you actually needed to get a couple of boxes to get all the cards, that certain cards were sort of split up that way, that you actually needed to buy a lot of cards. And Magic actually did have this sort of buyback system where you could sell cards you just got as long as they were in mint condition back to them in order to get trade-ins, sort of, where you could trade in for some of the cards you didn't have. It was this really interesting system at the time that would not work at all now. But at the time, it was kind of neat. Let's talk about the various famous important cards in Antiquities. I'm just going to combine my 2 sections together now because it's a lot easier than I've been sort of splitting them up. First, I want to talk about Mishra's Factory was the first land to have this special ability where not only did it tap for mana, but you could spend mana and turn it into a creature. So this way, Mishra's Factory, you could attack with it. You could turn it into a creature and attack with it. It was kind of a neat effect that was really interesting at the time. Mishra's Workshop was another very interesting one, where it would tap for 3 mana, but you could only use it on artifacts when you're using artifact spells. So it means when you're casting and playing an artifact, you could only use it for doing that. Then there were the Urza land. There was 3 of them. Urza's Mine, Urza's Power Plant, Urza's Tower. The thing about the Urza's land is normally when you play them, they could only tap for 1 mana of a kind. But if you had a Power Plant, a Mine, and a Tower, the Power Plant now taps for 2. The Mine now taps for 2. The Tower now taps for 3. So if you have 1 of each of these lands, combined they tap for 7. 3 lands change from 3 mana to 7 mana. Of course, you could have a play set of all of them, and that way you could have a lot of mana, and it was this mana bloom, and it was very interesting. And actually, when I talk about the cards that had multiple versions of it, The lands were the really ones that had it, and the Urza's lands were one of the examples of it. So then there was the Candelabra of Tanos. You could tap X mana to untap X lands. Now this was a very interesting effect because of whatever reason, if you could tap extra mana from lands, you could use it to untap more lands. So like the Urza's lands combined with that meant I could tap a lot of lands for mana and then use some of those lands to untap them with the Candelabra. So as long as I had 3 of each of the Urza's lands, I could tap 7 of them. I have my set of 3 producing 7 mana, and then I have like 4 extras producing whatever amount of mana. I use the Candelabra to untap them all, and I get extra mana, and that's really kind of cool like that. And of course there's been stuff that you can untap artifacts for mana too, so I could have had like, I pay mana over here, and then I untap it, and you can keep doing that, and it's one of the starts of the infinite mana sort of tricks, because there have been a lot of them over the years, but this one was one of the sources of it, that even now today I could combine it into a deck and create an infinite mana. Then of course there's Millstone. Millstone, you paid 2 mana and tapped it, and your opponent put the top 2 cards of his library in his graveyard. This was the source of the mill effect, because since it's a millstone, mill effects is causing an opponent to put the cards from his library into his graveyard directly. There are a lot of cards which have this mill effect now, and of course it's not really called that, but that's the nickname for the effect, and Millstone was the originator of it. Now there's Strip Mine, another land that there was 4 versions of. It tapped for a colorless mana, or you could tap it, sacrifice it, and destroy another land. Sacrifice meaning I get rid of it, I take it out of play, put it into my graveyard, and in return I can destroy another land. So it was a land I could use to destroy other lands. It was really cool. Of course there's Atog. Atog's really important, not because of what he was, but what he inspired. Atog himself, you could pay 0, sacrifice an artifact, and he got +2/+2 until end of turn. So you could keep pumping artifacts into him, especially if you have ways of creating artifact tokens, to make him bigger and bigger and bigger, and he was very cheap to put out. What he sort of inspired is there's a whole group of creatures that are these Atog creatures that have similar abilities, where you do something, you sacrifice something, you give up something, and it gets abilities, and they're very interesting, and they are, again, a series of creatures. There's Urza's Chalice. Urza's Chalice was a lot like the life-gaining artifacts I talked about in Unlimited, except this one was whenever I played an artifact, I could pay a mana, I could gain a life. So it was exactly like the ones where if you played like a black spell, I could pay a mana, gain a life. This one did the exact same thing, only it was specifically for artifacts, and it was introduced here. Sort of capped off that set of cards. Then there's Golgothan Silex. Golgothan Silex allowed me to get rid of all Antiquities cards in play, including the Silex. So you'd sort of tap it, you'd use it, and all the Antiquity cards in play would go away, would go to the graveyard, and that was a really interesting effect too. I've talked about these sort of effects that they sort of set wipe, but there have only been 3 that have ever existed, and this is one of them. Next, let's talk about Ornithopter. Ornithopter was the first 0 mana creature. It cost you 0 mana cast. It was a 0/2 flying creature. So in my opening hand, I could just play an Ornithopter down right away. It was really good, and it's always been sort of good because you can do a lot of combos with it and do a lot of things with it. Even though the creature itself isn't really great, it's just a creature I can throw out really quickly without any problems, and it flies. It's a 0/2 flyer for 0 mana. That's why it's really good. And the last one I want to talk about, of course, is Ashnod's Altar. Ashnod's Altar has been a big thing for a lot of combos, including infinite creature combos that I've actually used. What it does is I can sacrifice a creature to it, and I get 2 mana. I don't have to pay anything, I sacrifice a creature, get 2 mana. It's as simple as that. I'm just giving up creatures to get mana. And just the 2 mana cost means that you can sort of like double it, especially if you have ways of continually paying 1 to get creatures, or cycle mana that it does just 1 to do creatures and things like that. It's a way of another infinite combo. Infinite combos are usually win combos, and they're really some of my favorite to try to do. And this is another one that I use this a lot for. I still use it today, because there hasn't been much better than the Ashnod's Altar for doing something. Anyway, so that's it for today. We've talked about Antiquities. We talked about a lot of interesting cards from it to talk more about the next set later on. So if you have any questions or comments, if you want to talk about Antiquities or anything else related to Magic, just leave it in the comments below. We'll discuss it. Please become a citizen, subscribe, and join the Empire. We're always looking for more members. If you did enjoy this video, leave a like. It shows your support. Share it with people. Again, that's a way of supporting us to show that you enjoy us. And until the next time, I bid you farewell.